The starship Vigilant Fury exploded in a brilliant cascade of flames above the barren moon of Edros Prime, scattering burning debris across the blackened sky. Its hull shattered into thousands of sharp fragments, each one reflecting the dying light of twin suns. A momentary silence fell over the battlefield, a vacuum filled only by the soft hum of distant engines, the faint buzzing of shattered comm channels. Captain Juno Marek watched with an unblinking stare, her expression unreadable as the last remnants of her ship disintegrated into the vacuum. The blast was massive, almost beautiful in its destructive precision, a fitting requiem for a fleet that had once stood proud and unyielding. But now, all that remained were the sparks of fading stars, drifting slowly into the dark. She didn't scream. She didn't move. Her hands hovered above the shattered console, her fingers trembling. Not from fear, but from the fury that burned through her veins. There was no time to mourn, no time for regret. The fight had only just begun. Humanity's patience had worn thin, and the Galactic Council had finally crossed the line. They had taken everything from her and everything from her people. And now they would learn the cost of underestimating the relentless fire of humanity. It had started with sanctions, small, seemingly inconsequential. The Council had painted humanity into a corner, accusing them of minor violations, of acting too aggressively in defense of their territories. Earth's outer colonies, already on the edge of collapse, had become targets for arbitrary tariffs. The Council had been patient at first, adopting a veneer of diplomacy, offering Earthlings token punishments, embargoes, economic restrictions, even arbitrary border shifts. It was a slow burn. They had hoped the humans would buckle, that they would be too weak, too fragmented to stand together. But humanity, even in the face of crisis, had never been a species to yield easily. And then came the ultimatum. A demand. Dismantle the Sol Defense Network, or face intervention. The Council had the nerve to call it a peacekeeping action, a necessary measure to protect galactic stability. But it was clear to Captain Marek, as it was clear to everyone, that this wasn't about peace. This was about control. About stripping away the only remaining power humanity had, its ability to defend itself. The Earth had always been a beacon of strength in the galaxy. But this was something different. The Council had underestimated what it meant to push humans too far. They believed humanity would bend, that they would obey, that they would surrender. They hadn't reckoned with the core of who humans were, their tenacity, their resilience, their relentless pursuit of justice. Marek's ship had been one of the last to stand. A sentinel at the fringes of the galaxy, the Vigilant Fury had been tasked with defending the edges of human space from the increasingly hostile incursions of the Council's fleet. And despite the best efforts of the Council's fleet, the ship had been a thorn in their side. But now, even that final symbol of defiance was gone, consumed by fire and fury. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Humanity's battle for survival would not end with the Vigilant Fury. No, not even close. She turned from the smoking wreckage of her ship and gazed out into the vast expanse of space, her breath steady, her mind cold and calculating. What the Council didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that humanity's greatest strength was its ability to adapt, to evolve, and to fight even when everything seemed lost. When the Vigilant Fury was gone, when every ship in the fleet had fallen, that was when the real fight would begin. That was when humanity would rise from the ashes of their defeat and show the galaxy what it meant to challenge the human race. Deep beneath Edros Prime's surface, an entirely different kind of war was being waged. For centuries, humanity had prepared for the moment when the galaxy would turn against them. The Sol Defense Network, touted as the most advanced defense grid in the galaxy, was nothing compared to the last line of defense Earth had hidden away. The Sleeper Legions, buried deep in the crust of planets, hidden in asteroid fields, forgotten by the galaxy at large. The Sleeper Legions were humanity's final contingency plan. They had been placed in cryostasis during the Great Expansion, after the Earth had taken its place among the stars, awaiting a day when their existence would be needed. And now, the day had arrived. General Brax, known as the Butcher of Foros for his brutal and effective tactics during the wars of the early colonies, stood in the depths of the underground complex, his face illuminated by the cold glow of dim lights. The corridors were sterile, metallic, the air thick with the smell of old technology and suspended life. The Legion's awakening was nearly complete. A low hum filled the room as the cryo chambers, lined along the walls, slowly hissed open. Inside, rows upon rows of soldiers began to stir, their eyes flicking open, adjusting to the light. Their bodies were encased in reinforced combat armor, powered by an artificial musculature that made them stronger than any human soldier had been before. Brax walked past the sleepers, his boots echoing in the silence, his mind already shifting to battle mode. He didn't have time for speeches, no time for ceremony. The situation was too dire, and his soldiers too hardened. All they needed was a mission, and their mission was simple. Take back what the Council had stolen. Remind them why humanity was not to be trifled with. He stopped in front of the control panel, fingers flying over the ancient controls. The air was tense, and the walls hummed with the anticipation of a war that had been building for generations. When the last soldier had awoken, Brax gave the order. Activate the platform. There was no fanfare, no grand declaration, just a single command. And the ground began to shake. It was the first sign of the revolution that was about to erupt across the galaxy. Above Edros Prime, the Council's fleet was still in position, oblivious to the shift beneath their feet. They didn't know that the moon wasn't just a barren rock, a simple outpost. They didn't know that it had been transformed years ago into something much worse. A mobile war platform, equipped with enough firepower to obliterate an entire fleet in a single blow. And as the first engines of the ancient war platform fired to life, sending tremors through the moon's surface, Captain Merrick's voice came through the comms, cold and unyielding. They wanted to erase us. Now we'll remind them who we are. The platform, silent and deadly, shifted into position, hidden beneath the surface for generations, now unleashed. Edros Prime had ceased being just a battlefield. It was a weapon, a declaration. And the galaxy would soon know the wrath of humanity. The first salvo came without warning, a pulse of concentrated energy that streaked across the sky, brighter than the stars themselves. A wave of destruction slammed into the Council's fleet, shattering their formations in a chaotic flurry of sparks and disintegrating hulls. The vigilant fury was gone, but its final legacy had been sealed. The sleeper legions, buried deep beneath the surface of Edros Prime for centuries, were now fully awakened. And their battle was only beginning. On board the war platform, General Brax stood before the vast array of holographic screens that displayed the shifting positions of the Council's forces. His battle-hardened eyes scanned the visual feed as the ancient warship hummed to life. Its massive frame, once hidden in the moon's crust, now loomed like a predator emerging from the shadows, its weaponry powered up and ready to wreak havoc. The platform had been dormant for millennia, but now, the ancient engines roared as they surged to life, propelling the massive weapon into position. With every passing second, the scale of the impending battle grew. The first strike had been decisive, but the real war was just beginning. Humanity's long-dormant technological might was about to be unleashed in a way the galaxy had never seen before. The Council's fleet was reeling, their ships scrambling to regroup, but they were far too slow. Humanity had spent centuries crafting this moment. Every inch of the sleeper legions, every weapon of mass destruction hidden away, was now being brought to bear. Captain Merrick's voice crackled over the comms, her tone filled with a cold resolve. This is just the beginning. They'll learn not to underestimate us. Her words cut through the static, but the weight behind them was undeniable. She had seen firsthand what the galaxy thought of humanity. They were dismissed, treated as little more than an afterthought in the grand scheme of galactic power. But the Council had gone too far. They had forgotten the one thing that made humans unique, their willingness to fight, to sacrifice everything for survival. The war platform began to move, its massive weapons swiveling into position. The platform's exterior was reinforced with a crystalline alloy, impervious to most energy-based weapons. It was a relic of a long-forgotten time, an artifact of humanity's past, hidden away when Earth's expansionist ambitions had been curtailed by a coalition of alien species, all united in their fear of what humanity could become. The platform was armed with disruptor cannons that could slice through the hulls of enemy ships like a hot knife through butter. But that was just the beginning. The war platform was also equipped with a graviton pulse weapon, an ancient weapon that used highly focused gravity waves to bend space itself. When activated, it could collapse the very fabric of reality around enemy ships, crushing them into nothingness. As the war platform readied its weapons, General Brax's mind was focused on the battlefield ahead. He knew that the key to victory was not simply overwhelming force, but strategy. He had spent years, decades even, preparing for this moment, and he would not allow this opportunity to slip through his fingers. The Council's fleet had responded to the first strike with typical arrogance. Their ships had begun to regroup, forming a defensive perimeter. They were well organized, their ships sleek and agile, designed for rapid response and overwhelming firepower. But they were not prepared for the fury that was about to be unleashed. Humanity's war platform was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was a weapon born from the desperation of survival, and it would be their undoing. As the war platform fired its next barrage, a series of plasma rounds streaked across the void, impacting with surgical precision. The Council's ships exploded, in violent bursts of light, their shields failing under the sheer force of the strikes. But they didn't stop. They couldn't. There was too much at stake. As their ships scrambled to evade the attacks, they began to retaliate, launching their own energy blasts into the vast expanse of space. But they had miscalculated. The war platform's crystalline armor absorbed the blasts, barely registering the impact. In the distance, the first of the Council's ships were drifting in pieces, their fragmented remains slowly being pulled into the gravity well of Edros Prime. Brax stood motionless, his fingers dancing over the controls, directing his forces, with a precision that came from years of warfare. His face, illuminated by the shifting lights of the console, was an unreadable mask. He had always been known for his ruthlessness, his willingness to do whatever it took to win. But today, there was something more in his eyes. Today, there was a fire that had been waiting to burn for centuries. On the bridge of one of the Council's warships, Admiral Rhys Arkin stood in shock, his eyes wide as the destruction unfolded before him. The Sentinel, his flagship, was buckling under the onslaught. "What? What is that?" he muttered, staring at the unholy power of the human weapon. It couldn't be. No one had known about such a platform. They had believed humanity was nothing more than a fractured, disorganized species, incapable of such technological feats. And yet here they were, facing the unimaginable. His comms buzzed with frantic reports from his fleet. "Admiral, we're losing ships at an unprecedented rate, shields failing, engines disabled." The voice of his operations officer was tinged with panic. There was no plan, no contingency for this kind of attack. The Council's fleets were powerful, yes, but they had never encountered anything like this. They had never thought to prepare for the raw, unbridled fury of a species pushed to the brink of annihilation. In the depths of Edros Prime, deep within the war platform's core, the hum of the graviton pulse generator grew louder, resonating through the vast chambers. The weapon was ready. General Brax's voice rang out across the comms, sharp and decisive. "Initiate the graviton pulse." The order was given without hesitation, and the weapon fired. For a split second, time itself seemed to warp. Space twisted, bending around, the concentrated force of the pulse. And then, with a massive shockwave, the fabric of space itself seemed to tear. The Council's ships caught in the pulse's wake were instantly crushed under the immense gravitational forces, their hulls collapsing inward, their crews erased in an instant. The stars themselves seemed to flicker, as if the universe itself had momentarily forgotten where it was. The battle was far from over, but the tide had shifted. Humanity had gone berserk. Not out of mindless rage, but from the realization that survival was no longer a guarantee. It had become a choice. And today, humanity had chosen war. The brutal conflict between humanity and the Galactic Council was now in full force, but neither side was prepared for the sheer ferocity of what had begun. The war platform, now fully operational, had only just begun to demonstrate the depths of its destructive potential. In the vast emptiness of space, the fight had transformed from a struggle between mere factions to a struggle for survival, one that would shake the foundation of the galaxy itself. The Vigilant Fury, humanity's flagship, had been lost in the opening moments of the battle. But it had set into motion a chain of events that none of the Council could have anticipated. Its final act had awakened the Sleeper Legions, ancient soldiers whose memories were stored within the very heart of humanity's most guarded relics. These were no mere soldiers. They were living embodiments of humanity's defiance, crafted during the early days of Earth's expansion. Each warrior, each ship, had been engineered to endure the harshest conditions of deep space combat. Now they were unleashed, not as mindless puppets, but as warriors with a singular purpose: to avenge the humiliation their species had endured for millennia. On the battlefront, the once organized Council forces now floundered. Their fleets, carefully designed for rapid response engagements, were being torn apart by the sheer unpredictability of humanity's strategy. The Vigilant Fury's last gambit, the Graviton Pulse, had shattered the Council's flagship formation, but that was just the beginning. The Sleeper Legions, aided by the war platform's unrelenting bombardment, had begun their ruthless offensive, carving through enemy fleets with devastating precision. Brax surveyed the carnage unfolding before him. His tactical projections, once thought to be bold, were now proving to be the key to humanity's victory. His mind was sharp, calculating, as each move on the battlefield unfolded like a chessboard. The Council, despite their vast technological superiority, had never encountered humanity's willingness to push beyond conventional warfare. It was not merely about strategy or weapons. It was about the human spirit, and in that spirit lay the difference between victory and defeat. He watched as the war platform unleashed another series of devastating energy pulses, carving through the ranks of the Council's ships. One by one, their once pristine warships crumbled under the assault, their hulls buckling and shattering, their captains powerless to stop the oncoming onslaught. But the Council was not one to be easily defeated. Their commanders, stunned by the ferocity of the attack, scrambled to regroup, adapting their strategy in real time. Admiral Rhys Arcan was not the type to bow under pressure. A veteran of countless galactic engagements, he had been part of the Council's military elite for decades. But even he had never faced anything like this. His flagship, the Sentinel, was crippled but still operational, and it remained the anchor of their defense. "Reassess, reconfigure our tactics. This is not a standard engagement," he ordered, his voice unwavering despite the chaos around him. The Council's ships, though battered, still had formidable firepower, and they were determined to make humanity pay for every inch of ground they gained. As the battle raged on, a new element emerged on the battlefield. Humanity's fleets, once fragmented and scattered across the galaxy, had begun to coalesce, pulling together remnants of warships, colony defenders, and civilian vessels, all under Brax's command. The Sleeper Legions, guided by the ancient technology buried beneath Edros Prime, had turned the tide with overwhelming numbers and superior tactics. Their assault was relentless, their movements synchronized like a dance of death. For the Council, it was as if they were being pulled into an inexorable maw, their ships falling into a trap of their own making. They had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now they would pay the price. On the Sentinel, Arcan's strategic mind raced, searching for any advantage. They had one asset left that might give them a fighting chance: the newly developed quantum cloaking system, a prototype weapon that could render the ship invisible to enemy sensors. If they could implement it just long enough to reposition and catch the human forces off guard, there was a slim chance they could turn the tide. But the clock was ticking. The Council's ships were already in disarray, and without reinforcements, their position would soon become untenable. Meanwhile, on the front lines, the Sleeper Legions had pushed deeper into enemy territory, utilizing their formidable AI systems to calculate every move with chilling accuracy. These soldiers, once thought to be nothing more than a myth, had become the Council's worst nightmare. They fought with an unrelenting focus, their personal histories merged with the knowledge of centuries of warfare, and every action was motivated by a singular drive: revenge. These ancient warriors, augmented by advanced cybernetic enhancements, were a new breed of combatant. Their tactics were fluid and unpredictable, adapting to every shift in the enemy's formation. But it was not Only the sleeper legions who fought with fury. Humanity's warships, including the vigilant Fury's successors, had begun to form an unbreakable line of defense. Each ship was designed to withstand the most extreme conditions: rigid armor plating, advanced energy shields, and weapons capable of devastating entire fleets. The Council's tactics, designed to exploit human weaknesses, were now ineffective. The Council had hoped to use their superior technology and superior numbers to crush humanity's resistance. But they had underestimated one thing: the human capacity for invention. The warships, constructed with pieces of old Earth technology, components, that were deemed outdated by galactic standards, had been refitted and re-engineered into the most deadly fleet the galaxy had ever seen. The technology wasn't cutting edge, but it was resourceful, and it was tailored specifically for one purpose: to fight back against overwhelming odds. Now, on the outer edge of the battlefield, a new threat emerged. The Sentinel's cloaking system had been activated, and for a brief moment, the ship vanished from sight. But Brax wasn't fooled. He knew that the true nature of the Council was to strike when their enemies were at their most vulnerable. The moment of invisibility would not be enough to evade humanity's wrath, and the time for retreat had long passed. "We know your move, Archon," Brax muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing. "And you're out of time." The war platform's engines roared as it maneuvered into position, its graviton pulse, weapon locking onto the Sentinel's cloaked signature. Brax could feel the tension building as the weapon powered up. It was not a matter of skill, nor tactics. It was a matter of will, and humanity had already made its choice. With a final, resounding blast, the graviton pulse surged forward, streaking across the void, its shockwave ripping through the fabric of space itself. It collided with the Sentinel, sending shockwaves that rattled the core of the Council's flagship. In an instant, the mighty vessel was reduced to rubble, its cloaking system rendered useless. The galactic tide was shifting, and the Council had no choice but to brace for the inevitable. As the shattered remains of the Sentinel drifted through the void, glowing embers trailing behind what had once been the pride of the Galactic Council, a silence momentarily fell across the battlefield. It was not peace, not even a pause in the violence, but a breath, a sharp intake of disbelief that echoed across both sides of the war. For the Council, it was the horrifying realization that their most advanced warship, their symbol of supremacy, had been obliterated in a single calculated strike. For humanity, it was a moment of vindication. A declaration, not in words, but in fire. We are not broken. We are the storm. In the aftermath of the Sentinel's destruction, Admiral Brax stood at the core of humanity's command nexus, encased within the reinforced bridge of the dreadnought Honor Reclaimed. The vessel, a hybrid of Earth's early, deep space engineering and salvaged alien tech, was more than a command ship. It was a monument to human ingenuity and rage. Its interior was alive with motion, a flurry of tactical AI reports, gravitational field distortions, power surge analyses, and enemy fleet maneuvers flooding the command consoles. Brax remained calm, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of the battlefield, where thousands of individual markers pulsed in red and blue. His voice, steady and resolute, cut through the controlled chaos. "Push the southern flank. Disrupt their formation before they can realign. Deploy the vortex cannons to sectors 9 through 11. No mercy." And mercy was not coming. The Council's once immaculate formations had devolved into desperation. Fleet commanders barked erratic orders, their voices cracking as their ships tried to reposition under relentless fire. The void was littered with the glowing husks of burned-out carriers, their interiors exposed like skeletal remains of ancient beasts. Council cruisers, once feared for their impenetrable shields, flickered weakly under the assault of humanity's particle destabilizers, an old Earth weapon repurposed to bypass modern shielding tech. It was crude, it was brutal, and it was devastatingly effective. Human warships moved like predators, sleek, fast, and lethal, coordinated in swarm tactics once studied in Earth's biological warfare simulations. Just as wolves cornered a lone stag, humanity's ships would isolate a Council vessel, bombard it with EMP darts, and then rip through it with magnetic railguns. Each engagement was a lesson the Council learned too late. But victory did not come without its toll. Across the war front, hundreds of human ships bore the scars of the conflict. deep hull fractures, venting plasma, communication towers sheared clean off. Lives were lost by the thousands. Brax knew each death personally, if not by name, then by weight. They haunted him. Engineers crushed under hull depressurizations. Young navigators lost when a heat vent ruptured near the engine core. Sleeper Legion warriors, despite their augmentations, torn apart by antimatter mines. The cost was immense, but the resolve remained unbroken. The war platform, now drifting into a more central position in the sector, served as the eye of the storm. Its gravitational anchors pulsed with latent energy, holding its position against the subtle pull of a nearby neutron star. Within its hull, the quantum reactors thrummed louder, entering a critical phase of synchronization. The AI core, an ancient artifact known only as Vigilant Voice, continued its cold, deliberate process of warfare orchestration. This wasn't just a machine. It was an archive of Earth's darkest military blueprints, compiled during the last days of the Martian Rebellion and preserved by a rogue AI enclave that had vanished into deep space centuries ago. The Vigilant Voice didn't simply analyze, it adapted. Every second, it recalculated probabilities, deciphered enemy tactics, and altered the offensive plan. It studied the Council's reaction time, the angle of their retreats, the timing between shield recharges. What once took human minds hours, the platform now executed in milliseconds. And with every adjustment, humanity's grip on the battle tightened. The Galactic Council's high command, fragmented across multiple systems, was no longer unified. Panic bred division. Some advocated full retreat. Others called for the activation of a forbidden protocol, Project Eclipse, a planetary sterilization weapon, outlawed for its indiscriminate carnage. It could erase entire continents in seconds. It had never been used. Until now, its existence was rumor. But in desperation, rumor gave way to reality. On the Council's flagship fallback vessel, the Crescent Lament, High Strategist Kael Voth debated with his remaining admirals. His crimson-scaled skin glistened under the light of the ship's emergency beacons, his expression locked in fury and disbelief. They were primitives, cast out of galactic favor. How did they learn so fast? His voice trembled with something unfamiliar. Fear. They didn't just learn, replied Admiral Saris, her voice cold and sharp. They remembered. That truth gnawed at the Council's psyche. In their arrogance, they had dismissed the humans' ancient conflicts, their brutal history of wars, rebellions, genocides, and survival. But humanity had not forgotten. Those centuries of darkness had become fuel, lessons encoded into strategy, trauma molded into discipline, rage refined into calculation. The Council fought with rules, humanity fought with memory. Meanwhile, Brax received intel from Deep Recon. Scouts, one of the Council's science ships, had activated a signature-matching Project Eclipse. His jaw clenched, and for the first time since the battle began, he hesitated. So, they would rather burn it all down than accept defeat, he muttered. There was no time to deliberate. Prepare the Shock Lance protocol. If they're going to play gods, we'll remind them who taught fire to the stars. The Shock Lance, a focused beam weapon designed to collapse a target's reactor core, was dangerous even to the user. It overloaded local space-time, warping gravity fields in a 30-kilometer radius. Brax had one shot, one chance to destroy Project Eclipse before it could be fired. As the targeting array locked in, Brax gave the order. Let history remember. Who stood when all else fell? The beam launched. A crack split across the cosmos. The energy tore through the void, a spear of blinding white crashing into the Council's sterilizer ship. There was a flicker, a pause, then silence. The vessel imploded inward, vanishing into its own gravity well. The battlefield was frozen. Both sides stared as reality itself seemed to buckle and settle. And then, humanity advanced. The destruction of the Crescent Lament was the final tipping point. For the first time in the war, the Galactic Council could no longer deny the depth of their mistake. The arrogance that had driven them to discard humanity as a fledgling species, too primitive, too broken to ever challenge their dominance, had proven to be their undoing. Now, As the remaining council ships limped through space, survivors clinging to their fractured fleets, a new understanding began to crystallize across the galaxy. Humanity was no longer a fringe, insignificant player. They were a force that demanded respect, but the victory came at a cost. The aftermath of the war left Earth and its allies scarred, both in terms of resources and morale. The warships that had once been symbols of humanity's indomitable will were now floating monuments of loss. Every vessel carried the ghost of its fallen crew, and every battered hull was a testament to the cost of their defiance. Yet amidst the devastation, there was also something else, something powerful and unspoken. A new unity was forged. Admiral Brack stood on the bridge of the Honor Reclaimed, staring out at the stars, once again silent in their eternal stretch. The dark void of space had always been a place of fear, but now it was a canvas, one that humanity had painted with its blood, its sweat, and its unspeakable sacrifices. The faintest glimmer of distant stars shone, but Brax's mind was elsewhere. He thought of the soldiers, the engineers, the civilians who had worked tirelessly in the shadow of war. He thought of the families who had lost so much. He thought of the millions of voices calling out into the void, now gone, swallowed by the same darkness they had tried to conquer. Yet humanity had persevered, and now they stood at the threshold of something greater. "We've done it," Brax muttered to himself, almost as if trying to convince himself of the truth. But at what cost? The question lingered, but it was the cost of victory, the price of survival, that drove every decision, every move from here on. Earth was no longer just a planet among billions in the galaxy. They had proven that they could not just survive, they could thrive. The Galactic Council had learned their lesson, but it was a lesson written in fire. One that, for them, came too late. In the quiet aftermath of the battle, as Earth's forces slowly pulled back, resettling into their positions, a deep conversation began to unfold, one that would echo through every galaxy. No longer would humanity hide in the corners of space, struggling for survival. No longer would they simply obey the commands of those who thought themselves supreme. The era of submission had ended. What would the next age look like? What place would humanity carve out for itself in the broader galactic community? Admiral Brack stood once more, staring at the swirling depths of space. His crew moved about him, going through the motions of post-battle protocol. But Brack saw something else in their eyes. Something he hadn't seen in years. Hope. Real hope. The kind of hope that filled people's hearts not with blind optimism, but with the quiet confidence that they were capable of shaping the future, of rewriting the rules, of breaking barriers that had once seemed unbreakable. Humanity had fought and bled for this future, and now it was theirs for the taking. "Captain," a voice called from behind him. Brax turned. It was one of his lieutenants, holding a datapad. "Sir, we've received communication from the Confederation. They've expressed their willingness to talk about a new peace agreement, about the future of the galaxy." Brax didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched, as if he were waiting for something, some deeper meaning to emerge from the words. And then, as if making a decision that had been lingering at the edge of his thoughts for too long, he nodded. "Send the response," he said, his voice steady. "Tell them. Humanity is ready to talk, but on our terms." The lieutenant's eyes widened for a moment, unsure of the gravity of the statement. But Brax's gaze remained unwavering, as if he had just sealed the fate of something larger than himself. Humanity had crossed the threshold. They were no longer the underdogs, the outcasts, the pawns. They had become something far more dangerous. They had become the storm that broke the foundations of 1,000 empires. The days of submission were over. Across the galaxy, those who had once viewed Earth as a dying, irrelevant planet now had no choice but to acknowledge its power. The Council had pushed too far, and humanity had gone berserk, unleashing a fury that changed the very nature of the galactic balance. Earth was no longer the fringes of space. It was the center of something new. A new age had begun, and humanity was poised to shape it in their image. The stars above shimmered, distant and cold. But for humanity, they no longer seemed so far away. And as the Honor Reclaimed made its slow course toward Earth's home system, Brax allowed himself one final thought. Let them remember us. And, for the first time in a long while, he smiled. Thank you for reading. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to leave a comment with your thoughts. What do you think humanity's future in the galaxy holds? Let's discuss in the comments below.